Are you planning to buy a new GPU? Have you decided on the amount of VRAM? Nvidia says the 8GB is enough for 1080p, but the evidences show otherwise. Before I show you the test results, let's go back to 2015, the year we made 8GB cards for the first time. Yes, you guessed right. R9 390 was the first 8GB card that AMD launched on the market. This was a direct competitor of GTX 980. Unlike the 390, GTX 980 card had only 4GB of VRAM, but less memory wasn't considered a weakness that time. There were many reasons why the 8th generation games used less graphic memory. One of the reasons was the X11. Many games of that time used the X11 API. An API was known for high CPU consumption and also low memory consumption, until the 9th generation games started with the X12. Apart from catastrophic problems of DX12, such as shader compilation stutter, this API has another problem: heavy consumption of graphic memory. This is not difficult to find out. It's enough to test a game that uses DX12 and DX11 at the same time. For example, compare the control game in two modes. Memory consumption in DX12 is so much higher than DX11. Now add this to heavier games, ray tracing, upscaling techniques, and also frame generation. All this makes 8GB cards lose their value. In fact, every 8GB card that is released, it's already a dead card. But enough talking. Let's see how 8GB cards are in practice. The benchmarks that you will see are the worst case scenarios. But since the future games will be even heavier, you can consider these results the best case scenarios. But the first game is nothing but the popular game of horror and survival lovers, Resident Evil 4 Remake. This game uses RE Engine. Those who play Capcom games know how hungry this engine is for graphics memory. But how much VRAM does this game use? 9.3GB only for 1080p. Even for an extreme resolution like 900p, you still need more than 8GB. This shows how critical 8GB GPUs are. I was looking for a great example to show you the difference between 8GB and 16GB cards until I found this one, RTX 4060 Ti. This card has two models, 8GB model and 16GB model. The two cards are identical in terms of other specifications. Now let's compare the Resident Evil game on these cards. In 1080p resolution with high textures, the 16GB model is 15% faster than 8GB. Expect worse results at higher resolutions. Here on 4K resolution with ray tracing enabled, the average difference between two cards reaches a terrible figure of 34%. Another nail in the coffin of 8GB card. The next game is Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. This game is a direct port of PlayStation 5. Since PS5 uses 16GB of shared memory, high memory usage should be expected, and this is exactly what happens. At 2K resolution with maximum settings and also ray tracing enabled, memory consumption is rampant. In terms of average speed, 68 against 53. The 16GB model is 28% faster. The 8GB model has been raised to the ground. The interesting thing is that when you look at the memory consumption of 8GB model, everything seems normal. Consumption is still under 8GB, but when you look at the frame time graph, it's full of trouble. Jumps indicate stuttering, and stuttering is a bottleneck. And here the bottleneck is exactly the VRAM. The next game is Plague Tale Requiem. In terms of average speed, the 16GB model is 90% faster than 8GB version. If I didn't write the names of these two cards, you would have thought that I was comparing the RTX 4090 with RTX 4060. The difference is like night and day. Now compare the 1% lows. 57 against 26. 190% faster speed for the 16GB model. Also, if you look at the amount of memory consumption of 8GB model, you would think that you are on the side of the best graphic card in the world. Another important point is that in this game you have to turn off the frame generation. Maybe the reason for the 90% difference between these two cards is this technology, because frame generation increases the consumption of graphic memory. Nvidia technologies not only increase the speed but also decrease it. The next game is a famous game for PC gamers, not because of the great story or gameplay, but because of its terrible PC port. At the time of the release of this game, it was considered a serious threat even for 16GB cards, let alone 8GB cards. But after a year of updating, it is now in an acceptable condition. In the gameplay menu, a warning sign shows the 8GB version is facing a difficult situation. But here I want to compare these two cards from another angle, not in terms of graphic memory consumption, but in terms of main memory consumption. I mean RAM. The graphic settings are on the same on both cards, but the amount of memory consumption in the 8GB model is strangely much higher than 16GB model, 5GB more. But why does this happen? The answer is very simple. When the graphics memory is full, the game engine starts using the main memory, and because the main memory is much slower than the graphics memory, you will see a sharp drop in speed and heavy consumption of main memory. Other specifications such as 1% loss and average speed are clear as day and do not need to be explained. The next game is popular Star Wars game. This game uses Unreal Engine 4. The only game that I hoped it would run well on 8GB cards was this one. The reason for this is that this engine is not memory hungry unlike the previous engines. But here the story repeats itself once more and the 8GB card is struggling. But the good news is that you can easily reduce the graphics memory consumption to an acceptable level. But how? By disabling settings such as ray tracing and frame generation. These settings are addicted to consuming the graphics memory. If these things do not work, in the next step you should reduce the quality of textures. As you can see, there is a 4GB gap in terms of memory usage. The next game is Far Cry 6. The results are funny. Here the 8GB model is raised to the ground once more. The average difference between these two cards reaches an incredible figure of 153%. Of course, the reason for this level of bad performance of 8GB model is quite clear. The tester has enabled high resolution textures and also ray tracing, settings that are both memory based. When it comes to disappointing, Nvidia doesn't disappoint. I think these examples are enough to lead you to the conclusion that 8GB cards have reached the end of the life. It's 2024 and Nvidia still produces 8GB cards. Do they really test these cards before the cards are produced, or do they deliberately reduce the amount of graphics memory so that you have to buy the newer cards? Of course, not every game needs more than 8GB of VRAM. There are games in which 8GB and 16GB models offer the same performance, like the Lords of Fallen game, which consumes only 8GB of memory even on 4K, or Red Dead Redemption 2. Since this game is pretty old, it doesn't consume more than 8GB of VRAM, so you won't see any difference. Altogether, the game engine is an important factor in determining the amount of graphics memory consumption. Engines like Unreal Engine 5 has a reasonable memory consumption, but memory consumption in RE Engine games skyrockets. Since there are much heavier games coming this year, I highly recommend you to look for a 16GB card for your computer to be safe from PS2 textures, at least for 2 years. It is very bad that the card can run the game up to 90 frames, but due to low memory, texture settings are set to low. Finally, I want to share with you my experience with RX 574GB version. Here I am playing the Other Worlds Spaces Choice Edition with 4GB card, and as it is clear, even PS1 games had much better textures than this one. And here we reach the end of this video. I hope this video was useful for you. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel for more content in the future. Till next time, peace out.